Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We'll just, let people join us as we get a little bit closer to 1 here. It's about 1. Do you think we should start? I know we came right up against it yesterday. Should we get ahead and go?
Sure.
All righty. Well, hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Kay. I'm the Executive Director and CEO of Eastern Sierra Land Trust. I'm also Vice President of the CCLT, and we're sponsoring this today. And I'm just trying to get my notes up, so I apologize. They just disappeared. I also serve on CNRA's Partnership Coordinating Committee, which, as you know, has been tasked with helping CNRA by sharing concerns and information from my community, which is you all, to the PCC, and then from the PCC back to you, bringing challenges, opportunities, and information. And as probably what happened to you, what happened to me is almost as soon as the CA Nature Map went live, a little over a year ago when I first saw it, there have been concerns from land managers and land trusts and other NGOs about which lands count towards 30 by 30 goals and how the GAP codes were designated and how they were being applied. When I looked at the map for one of my regions, I saw only about half, if that, of our protected properties were included at that time. So as part of the PCC, I did talk to CNRA, and they heard our concerns, and they're getting it from a lot of other folks. And earlier this year, they entered into a contract with GreenInfo to help tackle the problem of either missing data or how we can update our data and or help assigning GAP codes. So today is our second webinar. If you were here yesterday, we are going to be covering a lot of the same material. And we did record yesterday, and I believe we're recording today, and we'll put it on the CCLT website. Before I introduce our guest speaker, Amanda from GreenInfo, I just want to see if there's any other board members here from CCLT that I would introduce. And what I can see right now, there isn't. So we'll just step forward, and again, I thank everybody for coming. And I'm just going to go over a few housekeeping things before I introduce Amanda. So as you saw when you came in, the webinar is being recorded. Slides will be made available. If you were here yesterday, we're going over the same material. You can submit your questions via chat. Would you also put in, we can see your name here, but if you could put your name in and your organization, I think that would just be helpful for us too. And then we're going to be announcing future webinars and workshops, and Amanda will kind of help cue some of that up, and we'll follow up at the end. And with that, I am super excited to introduce Amanda. And Amanda, I'm not even try saying your last name. I'm going to let you do, because Kochanek.
Kochanek.
Oh, Kochanek. All righty. And she is a senior project manager and geospatial data analyst at GreenInfo Network. Again, they've been contracted by CNRA to help us through this fix. Amanda leads a variety of project teams with a focus on data collection and analysis. Personal specialties include organization of complex projects. Oh, this isn't one of those, is it, Amanda?
Not at all.
Complex projects and data, identification of systems for automation, demographic analysis. She's been integral to the development and continued success of CPAD and CCED for over 2 decades. Frequently, her projects involve demographic analyses, equity and access to parks and open spaces, and reducing youth exposure to tobacco products and advertising. And besides all of that hard work, she also loves to cross country and downhill ski, reading, and she loves to embroider. So welcome, Amanda. We're so grateful to have you, and I will turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you for the introduction, and thanks for having us yet again. As Kay mentioned, this is the same material we covered yesterday, and similar to what we covered with Together Bay Area, I believe it was last week. We welcome you to stick around if you want a second go at it, but know that we're not covering new material in case you've seen one of those. So we are going to go over 30 by 30 CPAD, CCED, and GAP codes today. And let's see, so here's our agenda. We'll start with a quick intro, make sure we all have the very basic understanding of 30 by 30. We'll talk about protected lands and how those go into 30 by 30. That's a process of making sure they're in one of two databases that we'll talk about, CPAD and CCED, and making sure that their biodiversity protection is properly attributed through GAP codes. We'll also talk about the fact that CPAD and CCED are much broader, wider data sets that have a lot of uses across the state by different groups, agencies, organizations. So the work you do with us here, while this is currently geared around 30 by 30, it does go into all projects that use CPAD and CCED. So these updates, by making them once, will roll out to multiple locations and multiple data users, making sure they have the most accurate information. And then we'll talk at a high level today about how you can contribute that feedback to us. So if and when you find information is incorrect or inadequate, we do want to hear that from you, and we'll give you some brief overviews of how that can happen. There will be more in-depth webinars and training and support for folks who need that down the line, but today we'll give you a quick introduction to that along with Q&A. Feel free to put questions into the chat as we go. We can stop midway if there are a lot of them, or wait till the end if that fits best. I'll be asking a few polls of you guys today, and so I'll launch the first one, which is just wanting to gauge how familiar folks are with 30 by 30. So the options I have here are that you've never heard of it, maybe you've heard of it, you're somewhat familiar, pretty familiar, or really familiar with it. And I'll give that a few minutes here. It looks like we're about 70% complete. Minutes. All right. Over 90, so I'm going to end that. Thanks for answering. So I'll share the results now. So it looks like most of us are in the boat of being familiar with it. And everyone has at least heard of it. So that's good. And so that helps me know that the next slide here. So we're all pretty familiar. This is the CNRA main webpage, but back in October 2020, Governor Newsom signed this executive order in. It's meant to protect 30% of California's lands and coastal waters by the year 2030. So one other poll I have for you here, if I can find that, one second, is where do you think we are now? So if our goal is 30% of California protected, what's our current level of protection? So I have hopefully launched that poll. Yes. So the options we have here are 19, 21, 24, 26, or 28% protected. And I will say we're looking for the answer that CNRA is currently saying is protected. One more second here. We're pretty high on participation already, so thanks for doing that. All right. So our results here that I'll share, most folks were landing in the 21 and 24%. I find that to be pretty common, actually. So the CNRA, according to their website, we are at 23.78%. So 24% for those of us who just want to round up a bit. I will note that this number is known to be low. So many of you probably saw the map that Kay talked about in the beginning of this webinar and thought, well, my lands aren't accurate here. So as those data get corrected, this number will go up. So That will go up as we correct the data. It will also go up as additional lands are protected. This is what it currently looks like on their map, with the green areas being those land-based. There is a Coastal Waters Act portion of 30 by 30, but today we're purely focusing on the terrestrial land-based. So California is just over 1 million acres, 24 million acres protected. So that leaves us with roughly 6 million to go in order to meet that 30 by 30 effort. And as I noted, we expect that part of that will just be simply improving the data. Will get us closer to 30, won't get us all the way there. And we'll be adding new lands as folks protect it, those of you on this call. So your next question is probably, what counts as conserved in 30 by 30? And in order to count property acreage as conserved in 30 by 30, there are a couple things that need to be met. One is the land needs to be in permanent protection. That can be through fee title or deed. It can also be a conservation easement. Either of those are considered protected within 30 by 30. Once you know that land is protected, it also needs to be present in one of the two or both databases if you have both easement and ownership of the property in public protection. And those are CPAD and CCED. We'll be going through those today, and we'll talk about how you can look at that information and tell us if it's inaccurate or if it needs to be changed. In addition to the protected property being represented in the GIS databases that we'll talk about, we also need to know that it is protected for biodiversity. And for 30 by 30, they're using GAP codes 1 and 2. So GAP code 1 and 2, there are 4 of them, but GAP codes 1 and 2 are the ones that qualify under 30 by 30, and they're pretty complex. We'll go into more information about them today, and there'll be continued webinars for more detail, as some organizations are going to have a harder time applying the GAP codes to their properties. But the highest level is to qualify as 1 or 2. There are 2 core things that need to happen. One is that you need to have an active management plan for that property, and that management plan needs to emphasize biodiversity and the retention of natural land cover. So there are many state efforts at land protection. Some are recreation based. This one is a biodiversity based. And so for that reason, the measure being used is GAP codes 1 and 2. So as starting off, if you have protected lands, you want to make sure that they are in CPAD and CCED. I recognize a lot of the organizations in the list of participants today, and I know that for many of you, hopefully most, if not all, we do have information for you. But we also know that you're actively acquiring land. So over time, we need to reflect those updates and changes to the data. So CPAD and CCED are statewide databases where we collect information from you all and put all the information together from about just over 1,000 agencies that protect lands. Those go into CPAD if they are owned in fee ownership, and they go into CCED if they are conservation easements. So these databases have been around for about 20 years now. CPAD's a little older than CCED, but these are the direct data sets that feed into CNRA's 30 by 30 effort. So when those updates are made with us, those at GreenInfo in these 2 databases, those then roll into the next 30 by 30 update. As I said, they've been around a long time. There's a full website with all sorts of information and materials about those databases if you have questions. And an important note is that CPAD and CCED are broader data sets than things that are going to qualify to be in 30 by 30. So a first step is making sure that you're in either of those 2 databases as appropriate, but know that that will then also roll out to other users that use the data for CPAD and CCED. And the key element of GAP is what's going to determine if you get into 30 by 30, 30% protected. A little bit more about CPAD and CCED. They are the best databases for tracking these types of lands in the US. We do contribute all of our data to the national effort of PAD US, but we know they can always be better. There are, roughly 1,000 agencies and organizations working all the time. So there's a lot of information for us to not only keep up with changes that are happening out in the field, but just correcting old records that might not have been accurate when they were given to us 20 years ago. So there's sort of an ongoing effort. We also recognize that California is a very expansive and diverse landscape. So a lot of nuance can happen within the protected lands that are out there. And at the end of the day, we know the agencies and the organizations that protect these lands, you all on this call, are the ones that are authoritative about knowing about your lands. So we most definitely welcome your feedback and hope to get your help through the process. Later on in the presentation, we'll start to talk about how you can give us that information. On this map here, I've zoomed into the Bay Area to just show, I said that 30 by 30 and CPAD CCED are different. So you can see here on the map, if it's shown in blue, it's in CPAD and CCED, but for some reason it is not shown in 30 by 30 conserved effort for CNRA. Now, sometimes this is correct. So it might be a baseball field or a small playground or something that's not going to contribute to biodiversity. So it has importance and it should be in CPAD or CCED for other reasons, but it's not going to count towards 30 by 30. But those of you familiar with the Bay Area can probably look at this map and pretty quickly point out where the information is just wrong. And that's because the GAP code assigned to that property does not currently have it as a 1 or a 2, and it should be, which would mean it would therefore count in the 30 by 30 effort. So this is what we are trying to fix, knowing that we're not trying to get 100% because not all of these blue lands should be counted in 30 by 30, but we certainly know that there are errors there that need to be fixed now. So I did want to pause for a second here and ask you all about GAP codes. GAP codes are key to 30 by 30, and I wanted to gauge people's level of knowledge about them. So our third of, I believe, 4 polls now I just put out there. What do you know about GAP codes? So nothing, you've heard of them, you understand them, or you're an expert. I haven't gotten any experts yet. I can't wait till one day I'll get an expert and then that'll be my new best friend. You guys are good. 95% participation already. Thank you. All right, I'm going to end the poll and share the results for you. All right, so about 20% don't know anything about them. Totally fine. I didn't a few years ago. And then over half of us have heard of them a few times and 30% feel like they understand them. Impressive. Very good. Okay. And that. So at a high level, biodiversity protection, as we said, in 30 by 30 is defined by GAP codes 1 and 2. This is meant to measure biodiversity protection. It's important to note that you don't have to actually have the current presence of that biodiversity. So if you're in the process, say, of restoration, that's perfectly acceptable within the system. The 2 requirements are that you have an active management plan and that management plan is aiming to protect on the order of 95% of the property in its natural land cover. So as we show on the map, and we've talked about a few times, the current data on GAP codes that we currently have is limited and not only maybe is incorrect in areas, and that is known. So I wanted to address where we're at now and how we got there in the data, which is that GAP codes are a national effort, and the first application was a staged effort to put federal lands into the GAP code system. So the first 2021 release of CPAD and CCED was the first time we started to integrate the GAP 1 through 4 GAP codes. And what we were able to do was take information provided from PAD US, the national protected areas, where they have information about GAP codes, and apply those to the properties in California. Now, it's worth noting that at a federal level, it's much more possible to take the combination of the name of a park or a property and the agency managing and owning it and apply what's probably or highly likely to be the right GAP code. So when you have something like a national park, if you have national wild refuge, things of that nature are going to be easier to apply. And that means you can get sort of a large amount of GAP codes, things that you know are 1 or 2 associated in the system on the get-go. So that's what we did in the first round. And we know this works pretty well at the federal level. The problem is it really starts to fall apart once you get down to the state and especially the local level, just because there's so much nuance. You all out there are the ones with the management plans and actively protecting these properties. So we need your input to understand what you think the GAP code should be, not using an association, of the name or what agency is protecting that property. So again, this is where we're going to be asking for your help and your information, so that once we provide you information about more what GAP codes are, making sure you feel like you understand them, once you give us back those assignments, those will go directly into CPAD and CCED and then roll out into the next CNRA update of 30 by 30. We'll walk through each of the 4 GAP codes. I did put this in the slide deck, which will be available for those of you who want it for future reference. But for GAP code 1, again, that gets counted as conserved. And the main thing here is 95% of the land is being permanently protected against conversion away from natural land cover. The key element of GAP code 1 that differentiates it from the others is the allowance of disturbance events. And an example here would be fire is allowed through the process, and it's not interfered with. And if it's not actually happening naturally, it can be mimicked, as noted here. GAP 2 also counts as conserved in 30 by 30. Again, permanent protection, 95% roughly of the natural land cover with a mandated management plan. This does allow for some changes. So you might suppress wildfire in some areas would be an example, or if you have an insect outbreak, that might be controlled. So this is where you start to allow a little bit more human interaction with the land, but still qualify. GAP 3 is not counted in 30 by 30, but I do want to make sure that folks have that information on how you qualify as GAP 3. And so instead of the 95% protection of natural land conversion, that drops down to about 50%. This also allows for different uses on the property. So you can have low intensity, such as logging over larger portions of the land, or more localized but intense, such as mining, can be allowed. This is also conferring some information about federally listed and endangered species. And so if those are present on the property, that can help note the land as a GAP 3 category versus 4. GAP 4 is unfortunately a combination of doesn't qualify as 1, 2, or 3, but it's also mostly just unknown or no data at this point. So I think this is where a lot of folks are sitting of they were at a GAP, they've been associated to a GAP 4, but it's actually a GAP status unknown. So this is especially where we're hoping to learn from you folks where we should improve your GAP code. And so as you can see, this is not really known for mandated protection of natural land cover conversion. USGS does have a dichotomous key that helps you assign GAP codes. In working through that, a number of us found it pretty difficult to deal with sort of the order of the questioning and the language that was used and what actual key decision points help you determine your GAP code. So one of the resources that we've developed that we won't walk through today, but would be a part of future webinars, and this is also available in the toolkit and online, will be going through these key questions to end up in the right ballpark of what GAP code you think you qualify as. And so this can start to flow you in the right direction of what you should be deciding for a GAP code. And it's worth noting that GAP codes are not the only thing for 30 by 30. There are also what are called OECMs, or other effective area-based conservation measures. So there's some information about those here, but those are lands that really don't fit within the GAP code system. They might be lands that are protected, but it's temporary versus permanent. It might be really small, such as a wildlife corridor or bridge that's extremely small and hard to map at this level. So today we're not really focused on these, but I want to call out that they are a part of the 30 by 30's pathway document. But today what we're really focusing in on is improving GAP codes and making those as accurate as possible. And this is the language out of the pathways document about the OECMs and just a few examples for folks. So again, organic farming practices, community gardens, wildlife crossings, and things are those that they've put together in this other category of OECMs. So CPAD and CCED, I noted, are not just for 30 by 30. They're used by a number of other folks, and hopefully some of you on the call find it useful as a data set. They're long-standing databases who've been around. They've been around a couple decades now, and they're really meant to be flexible and sustainable so that they can be used by a large amount of groups. Some of you may have your own GIS very specific data files, and those may be most appropriate for a lot of your use, but these can help fill in information when you want to know who's working around you, who's working in your region, or if you want to look at a county, regional, or statewide scale. This can help bring the information from those hundreds of agencies together about the lands that they've protected into one database that you can work with. I've highlighted a few other cases where CPAD and CCED are being used, and regional effort, the Conservation Lands Network. It makes use of it from the initial running of the Marksand modeling, and then also in output. So they make heavy use of CPAD and CCED. OGALS, the Office of Grants and Local Services over at state parks, uses CPAD and CCED to look at recreational efforts. So where are folks not having access within a half mile to a recreational or open space resource? Again, that comes out of CPAD. Measure A in Los Angeles also made use of CPAD and CCED and continues to when they're looking at park equity. So again, who has access or not to recreational and outdoor nature resources. So I will pause for a second here to see if we want to do any Q&A yet, knowing that what we'll move to now is how we'll solicit your feedback and ways that you can get it to us. But Kay, do you know if there are any questions we should address before then?
There are actually. I think it might be helpful to hit them now. Would you like Clara to read them out of chat for you?
Yeah, if you could read them out, that would help, so I can make sure I don't miss any.
The first one from Vanessa is wondering about prescribed fire for the GAP codes. Is that allowed in GAP 2?
I cannot get an authoritative answer. My gut would be yes, it's acceptable. I think that especially, yeah, I guess it determines why it's being prescribed and if it's in order to help maintain or restore that natural land cover. So unfortunately, I can't answer that detailed question, but my guess is it's likely.
Okay, great. And then Mel has a question. We are implementing ITEK, Indigenous Traditional Ecological Knowledge, on easements that include mimicry as well as traditional land tending to increase biodiversity. What GAP code would that fall under?
That is a wonderful question. And very difficult to answer. I will say that 30 by 30 definitely still needs work on how ITEK is counted and not counted. I think that GAP codes are a very academic and sort of Western approach to analyzing these properties. So that might not be the best way to accurately reflect those important native lands that need to be considered protected because they often are the most and best protected properties. So I think that is one where we would welcome that conversation with CNRA and knowing that GAP codes might not just be the right answer in that instance. There might be a better way to more accurately represent that important protection.
Great. And I'll just share from CCLT's perspective that we have invited Jen Norris to be our guest speaker at our next quarterly membership meeting. And I'll ask Claire to put that date in chat. I can't quite recall. It's in May sometime, I believe. And so we'll let you know, but if we can get Jen there as our guest speaker, maybe we can have her answer some of these, and maybe we can have Geneva or Madeline also attend to help us with some of this. The next one is from Mel again. If we have inherited conservation easements where the LTMPs are written for single species mitigation, but our work plans are updated to include maintaining greater biodiversity, will we have to amend the original LTMP in order to receive GAP Code 1?
Okay, so let me make sure I've understood the question here in sort of a broad sense, but when we say under GAP code, there needs to be an active management plan. There's no sort of stamp check of what that is. So if the intent and the plan the organization has for that property qualifies as GAP 1, my understanding is that you should be able to classify that land as GAP 1. So it's not, I don't know what LTMPs are.
Sorry, it's a long-term management plan.
Oh.
It's yeah, it's for basically for set-asides and like mitigation properties. And so it needed to be it was the original plan that was submitted for recordation with CDFW and Army Corps.
Gotcha.
But like we're going to go above and beyond the LTMP in order to actually like tend to the upland habitats and increase biodiversity in other areas. So
yes, definitely. So no, it's not that anyone will be asking you to get an official LTMP rewrite or revision.
Okay.
If you feel you want or need to do that, totally fine. But no, that should not be considered a requirement prior to you. You know, if you feel like your actual management practices and intentions are long-term for GAP 1, that's sufficient.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yes.
And Mel,
With that,
sorry.
Hmm?
I was just going to say, Mel, before you go away, you've got another question, a couple down. Do you want to just address it while you're live right now?
Oh yeah, no, it was the same question as Vanessa's question, but it was for also cultural burning because prescribed and cultural burning are a bit different in scope. So, but I think your answer will probably apply to cultural burning because we do have mitigation measures. We don't use accelerants or any of that. It's all traditional. So.
Okay.
And
okay,
I
great.
do welcome people to unmute if there are questions that are going to be easier to address that way.
Okay.
I'm certainly happy with more informal dialogue as needed.
Okay. We
Thank
do
you.
have some
Thank you.
group today.
yeah,
Thanks.
this is Lauren with Sierra Foothill Conservancy. I wanted to tag on to Mel's theme here. Would that still apply if the property is grazed?
Grazing is a separate area that I think there's sort of a working group needed. My understanding is that they should be counting towards 30 by 30, but how as a community of land trusts and organizations you guys define that, I think needs to be sort of worked out amongst you guys so that you all feel comfortable with how each other are applying these GAP codes consistently. Does that...
Got it. Yes, that helps, and I think
Okay.
we're doing that. Thank
Yeah,
you.
and I think the message very strongly here we want to be is that you all know your lands best and that you should be able to apply the appropriate GAP codes. This isn't meant to be like the initial run of the federal lands down were meant for federal lands, and now that we're looking at local agency lands, we want you folks to be giving it, and we're building that ground up for those GAP code assignments.
Excellent. Thank you.
I did see there's a question about more than one GAP code. Yes, yes, you can assign. So within a property, and we'll go through this a little bit later and today and then also into the future. But yes, any property you have, you could assign acreage to all 4 different GAP codes as you saw appropriate.
And then there's a question here from Paul. Is there any distinction among the types of forest management that would apply to GAP 3 or possibly GAP 2? i.e. how are working forest easements that require elevated forest management standards or restoration-oriented forest management classified?
That is going to be a working group conversation.
Okay, I'm taking these down. I'm taking notes for working groups and we'll reach out to
Yes.
everybody.
And one thing that we will touch on this also is that GAP codes are definitely going to be the harder portion of this work. And part of the reason we are connected with CCLT and very much appreciating all of this is that we want you folks to have spaces to get together and make these decisions as a land trust community and organizations about how these things should be qualifying within the GAP code system. So we want to offer sort of conceptual consistency and structure for those conversations, but leave that decision making more with the groups that manage the properties themselves.
Let's see, I'm reading through here. Yep, we'll be setting up working groups. We'll circle back to the end. I think for GAP qualification, how does it reflect the suppression of fire in places that are burning more frequently than they have historically?
Again, harder for me to answer. I would come back. It really comes to intent. GAP is meant to be like, you may not currently, suppression within 2 is definitely fine. And so it would still qualify in 30 by 30. So if your question is, you know, between 1 and 2, that won't have huge impact on 30 by 30. If you definitely want to find if it's a 1 or a 2, I can certainly understand that, but I think we'd need more of a GAP expert to help assign which of those 2 it is. I did see a question from Ryan. Can a GAP 3 property be restored and qualify as a 1 or 2? Yes. So if you already had an active management plan, and I think that started, you may be able to just start with it as a 1 or 2. If that's longer term, these can be updated over time. So whenever that were appropriate, say it's currently a 3 and you don't have the active management plan, but in 6 months you do, and you feel like it's time to move that GAP code to a 2 or a 1, then yes, you are free to update those over time. We do know that things will change.
I think that's all the questions right now. Again, folks can keep putting them in, and as Amanda gets to the next section, as we said, we're a smaller group today, so if we want, we can even unmic and raise hands and go from there.
Yeah, definitely. And there will be plenty of opportunities for other meetings and also direct support to reach out to as questions come up. So this all is at the point of saying we really hope and want and welcome your feedback and information on your data. So as we said, we know it's inaccurate in spots. We think it's also quite good. And if we can work together, we can make it much more accurate for everyone, and the whole system of 30 by 30 will then benefit from that. When we started this process in terms of 30 by 30, we did step back and think about what was important and the fact that we'll be getting information from hundreds of agencies. And so we need to be somewhat systematic about that. We need to be able to pull these edits in and make sure that the information you give us flows all the way through the system and into 30 by 30. That being said, with roughly 1,000 agencies, we know that there's going to be a wide range of technical capacity and also just time capacity to work on this. So we do want to be flexible. So what we're offering are different ways that you can engage with us and that you can review the data and send us back information. So we do aim to remain as flexible as possible while still getting the information corrected and in the database. We will offer data verification and sort of QA, but that's more of a high level, saying that you've submitted this information to us and we want to make sure it gets accurately reflected into the database. So you are the authoritative assigner of your GAP codes, and then also ultimately the lands that you own or hold easements over. So we do welcome that input from you. One of the ways that we've thought about this is that for some groups, it probably is helpful to be offered what we're calling a toolkit. So this is for agencies, organizations, nonprofits, groups that manage or own lands in California and are interested in seeing what we currently have to make sure that they're accurate, and if not, update them so that the next run of 30 by 30 is as accurate as possible. Within the toolkit, we have instructions. We have things like the GAP code dichotomous key flowchart that I showed you. We also have GIS shapefiles specific to each agency across the state. For those who are not interested or able to use GIS, we will also offer tables, Excel listings of properties with details about them, and then a few different options on how you can view maps of those properties are going to be made available. So if you were to go to this link, this is already live. You're welcome to go visit it at any point. It will take you to the 30 by 30 toolkit download. And this lists all of the agencies currently within CPAD and or CCED. You can download the database on the same calands.org for the entire state of California if you're interested. But what we've done in the toolkits is narrow it to just those properties that you manage, in hopes that looking at just your properties will be easier to review than the thousands of records, hundreds of thousands of records across the state when you look at all of the different agencies. We also track, I'm going to say on the order of a dozen to maybe 15 different attributes about different properties, but within the toolkit, we've really narrowed it down just to the key elements that we'll talk about in a few moments here that are important to get right for 30 by 30. And actually for most users of CPAD and CCED, these are sort of the key things that people really need to know about your properties. So when you go to the site, you can do a keyword search if you're interested, or you can scroll through all of the agencies and pick the zip file or multiple zip files if you want to look at a few organizations' properties. So in this case, I put in Conservancy here in our key search, and we'll walk through an example of reviewing some of the property that the Nature Conservancy has within our databases. So if you were someone who is comfortable with GIS and are interested in reviewing what we currently have in CPAD and CCED, you can download the toolkit, unzip those to a working directory you want to use locally, and what you'll find are 3 shapefiles. Those shapefiles I've shown on the right here are for the CPAD or fee property. In this case, we're looking at the Dangerman Preserve. And the thicker dark green outline around the outside is the full park or property of the Dangerman Preserve. Within that, you can see that we have these smaller polygons. These are what we consider holdings, which are typically parcels. So we do manage the data both at the smaller granular level and at the higher full park or property level. You're welcome to use whichever is most beneficial for you. So if you find that you actually work at a sort of a parcel level within your park or property, you might find those useful. If you just manage the whole preserve as one big chunk, you can do that, whichever works best for you. But if you're a GIS user and you pulled in this information and say you thought, well, we actually own this property here also, this should have been included in the boundary, we would welcome you to just edit the shapefile. You could, pull over the vertices, include that property, and send it back to us. And that way we'll know that we need to revise your boundary, extend it, and include that area that was previously not there. The key attributes that we're hoping you'll review are the name of the park or the property, if the public is allowed to access the property or not. So this could be open access, closed, you can't go there, or some sort of restriction such as a permit or seasonal thing that causes it to only be accessible to some folks sometimes. We also list that you are the manager, so you can tell us if we've got it wrong. Perhaps somebody else actually manages the property and we need to update our records. This can happen if you work in an area where transfers are happening between agencies. Sometimes we learn about that sort of midstream, and so we end up with a manager who is actually a temporary holder of the property as it was moved to another entity. If you know the year established, I will please advocate that you include this information. So land acquisitions happen over time. Unfortunately, when they get added to CPAD and CCED can vary. Sometimes we don't learn right away that the property has been protected. Sometimes we learn 6 months in advance and can put it in as a planned acquisition. So knowing the actual date of the acquisition is really helpful for those of us who want to look at the change over time. So if you have that information, very much welcome that. And then we also list the acreage just so you can make sure it's in the right ballpark of what you're expecting for your property. If you wanted to edit, like I said, the shape, you can do that directly in the shapefile in the toolkit. You can also just directly edit in the attribute table if you felt any of this information is wrong. And when you send it back to us, we'll do a change analysis. So you don't need to flag edits or anything. We'll inherently look to see if anything has changed. I will note that there's info on GAP codes down here, and we'll touch on that a little bit more in a later slide about how those are entered. There are likely some of you who really don't want to work in GIS, so the toolkit also offers an Excel table option. So if you were the Nature Conservancy and you thought, well, I'd rather just open an Excel table and look at the properties I have, you can see that reflected here on the lower portion of the slide, where I've highlighted the Dangerman Preserve. This shows the same attributes that we just talked about, so the name, access, manager, and size. So you could indicate if any of those look incorrect to you, and we'll make that correction. You can also look at a map. So if you click in the column G here, there will be a link to a map that will open up online in our web application called Map Collaborator. So as you can see, if you clicked on the Dangerman Preserve again, it pulls up the same shape. It's shown in sort of pinkish red here because this is a no access property. So when it's shown on this map to the public, we try to indicate that folks are not actually welcome to go openly visit property. But you can submit information through Map Collaborator. So you could click it and tell us the property is wrong and submit adjustments through that tool if you wanted. You could also simply just tell us here and say, you've included too many parcels, or this map is wrong for whatever reason. You can just put text notes if that's more appropriate for you. There are other ways you can look at maps. So you can do these and send them back to us. You can do the GIS, but we also have what are sort of supplemental pieces of information we can offer, or other avenues you can send us data. So we have the map collaborator, as I showed. We can also provide you with PDF property maps. So for each property your organization has, we're happy to send you an individual map. I've shown 2 examples here for CAL FIRE, one of their units for a demonstration forest, and then one of their the Rainbow Ridge easement. So if you're interested in PDF maps, we're happy to send you those. We have those all produced and ready to go. We just didn't include them in the download because we didn't want extremely large file sizes if folks weren't going to be using the maps. So happy to provide those at any point. You can just drop us an email. Also, if you're more comfortable in Google Earth, we're happy to send you a KML or a KMZ. That's a quick, easy thing for us to do. So if you prefer that method for viewing and or submitting information back, we're happy to do that. And then also, we don't want to create extra work for you. So if you already have information and files that are useful, there's no need for you to recreate or generate or use the system that we have for the toolkit. You can provide us what you already have. So if your organization already has a geodatabase, shapefiles, KML of your properties, we're happy to accept that from you in that format. There's no need to revise the shapefile that we have in the toolkit. If you maybe don't have GIS, but you already know the parcel numbers for all your properties, we can accept that as an input to defining your properties. And also if you have existing maps, reports, property descriptions, so that information that you likely already have is perfectly acceptable to send us for us to update your lands. And that can come in through email. And I did put a note to myself here. I know CNRA had an online survey where you could submit saying my lands are incorrect in 30 by 30. If you submitted through there, we do still get those updates, and I will know to contact you about that, but you're also welcome just to dive in using the toolkit or direct contact to GreenInfo saying that we want to make our updates. That initial survey was really meant to gauge how much was needed. Like how much data work, how many people felt their lands were inaccurate, and the message was pretty loud and clear that it needs a lot of updating. So I think it's sort of served its purpose. If you want to use it, you're welcome to, but the more direct route would just be starting working with GreenInfo directly on making updates. So gaps and toolkits, the GAP toolkit portion. GAP code assignment is going to be hard for a lot of agencies and organizations. And we do want to recognize that the system is 1, 2, 3, 4. And I think that looks artificially very simplistic because there really isn't a 2.5 or a 1.7 or these sort of nuance that we all feel we have when we're intimately familiar with the properties that we manage. So we know this is going to be a challenge. I think getting through the inventory of your lands and making sure those are correct in CPAD and CCED are a great first step. And then the secondary step of GAP code assignment will hopefully become clearer and easier as we organize work groups. People are able to collaborate together and define in the land trust community how these GAP codes should be conceptually applied across multiple agencies. In doing some of these webinars and outreach, we've had a few common questions. So I thought I'd start by addressing those, which is how are they actually being assigned a GAP code? So when you have your shapefile or your Excel table for each property, there will be a column for GAP 1, 2, 3, and 4. So you can fill out the associated. If you have a 100-acre property, you could put 25 acres to each if that were the most accurate reflection, or you could put 75 acres to GAP 1 and 25 to GAP 3. So you're able to spread across those. You do not need to spatially define where those are within your properties. So within that 100 acres, you don't have to tell me specifically which 25 qualify as what GAP code. It's more just that the numbers add up at the end of the day. If you add GAP 1 through 4, they add up to the total property size. Any unassigned acres would go default into 4, so please make sure that you fully allocate the acres of 1 through 3 to make sure that's accurate. So yes, you can assign a mix of GAP codes to your properties, and you can assign GAP codes if you wanted down at the very granular parcel level that I showed on that map of the Dangerman Preserve, or you could just give us numbers for the full large park or preserve. So yes, and to be clear, who assigns the GAP codes, and it's you all. If you manage those properties, we're looking to you to be the most informed about what the appropriate GAP codes are to assign. And then I will wrap up here with sort of what's the overall timeline? When can we start to expect to see things? I know folks are anxious, and we are also to get updates out there. CPAD and CCED have long and will continue on a twice a year schedule release. So in June, we will be releasing updates that we're able to get in. That means if you're able to get me edits to your properties, fee or easements by the end of May, we will try our hardest to get those in by June. That being said, we're speaking to about 100 groups a week, and I don't know how many of you will respond and in what formats and how much information that'll be. So we will strive to do as much as we can by June, but we may or may not be able to do all of those edits. What I can say is that we will get everything in by our December update, and that is the next time that CNRA will be using CPAD and CCED. So if you don't make our June release, that will not impact how you look in 30 by 30, because that is not going to change until a December release of CPAD and CCED. So if you want your CPAD CCED edits to be reflected in the next CNRA update, the key is that you get them to me by Halloween, October 31st. Earlier is fine. And if you're a little bit later, we will try our hardest, but that's really sort of the best deadline. If you can meet that, then we feel confident we can get your information, both property updates, attributes about those properties, and your GAP codes. Once that comes out in December, CNRA will do their updated run of 30 by 30, and you should see that come online in spring of 2024. So I will ask one last poll if I can find it here, which is that as we move ahead, we do want to continue to offer support. So we thought we would ask you, and you can click multiple choices here, but if there are any sort of types of support that resonate as the most useful for you. So if there are training sessions about a toolkit or data work, maybe more recorded videos or live sessions. Library resources, if I set up office hours that once a month you can all come to a meeting. And if you have other ideas that don't quite fit in here, feel free to email or reach out to us. And if you come up with ideas after the meeting, we're also happy to hear all of those. So here are some sort of the main page. If you're interested in seeing the toolkit, go ahead and have a look here. And if you just want to generally contact us about anything, CPAD at calands.org is a great place to start from there. So on the kinds of support, already like 80%. Nice. Let me end and show you that. So yeah, it looks like folks want a variety of different kinds of support, and I'm happy to offer that. So thank you for that information. So now we'll move to Q&A. See what additional questions you guys have, and good. So Q&A in the chat and or unmuting your mic, whichever is a better fit for you.
There is one question in chat from Mel. Mel, are you still here? Do you want to speak to it yourself? It's a great question.
Yeah, it's just, because we are like starting to write grants to 30 by 30 nature-based solutions, etc. I was just wondering if these databases will also be capturing the other pathways to 30 by 30 goals, such as public access, community engagement, etc., especially like priority population, and how that's going to be kind of like, I guess captured in the database. I'm just curious.
Yeah. So CPAD and CCED, as they get updated, then tend to get, so they're updated for equity in terms of access, and also demographics by putting it together with census information. So as we update CPAD and CCED, we can then update how they spatially relate to the demographics and the population. So how many people—
Is that going to be using the CalEnviro screen map, or it's I might need to just like have a conversation with you all, because what we're doing more is workforce development. So some of our properties, because they're mitigation properties, don't fall within CalEnviro screen, but we're employing priority populations to tend them. And we're engaging with tribes. So it's a different type of a arrangement.
Yeah, I do think that's one that it would be key to make sure that direct conversations get you the most accurate
Great.
sort of information about that.
Mhm.
But definitely as things are updated, the demographics, and not only within CNRA, but there are other folks across the state who analyze, as you add new properties, are you reaching the right populations? So those start to fold into the demographic analyses that happen.
Okay, great. Yeah, because it's not always a one-to-one spatial match with CalEnviro Screen, but
Correct.
we have different benefits. So
Yeah, and also with CPAD and CCED, we do recognize, for example, a key element in the Bay Area was, well, maybe 30 by 30 isn't counting GAP 3, but for CLN it does count. So if in your region or your community, you could just say, well, CNRA might not be the right protected conserved areas for me to use. I'm instead going to use CPAD and CCED directly and include more lands that we feel are more appropriate for our region.
okay, great. Thank you.
I think it was Annie Burke who described it well, is there's sort of a dance going on when you have such a big state. So you have the dance of the state needs to prioritize and organize, and they have programs for recreation, they have some for biodiversity. And then as you go to each region, things start to shift and you have to sort of have different dance moves and tools. So trying not to be too rigid and accept that local people know best what they need.
Great. Thank you.
Great questions, Mel. Thank you. Anyone else have anything you want to put in chat, or just raise your hand and speak out? Well, we'll leave some space here, and while we're waiting to see if anyone wants to speak out, I'll just say, Amanda, thank you so much once again. This has been incredibly helpful, informative, and productive. And I think speaking for myself and for some texts that I'm getting directly, this is just incredible. It's really a way to help us move forward with some confidence. And we look forward to working with you more. And for folks who are here, we'll be reaching out shortly if we figure out. I took notes on between yesterday and today, some working groups that we already know that we're going to want to be setting up. But I know Amanda, I think, is doing another survey, but we'll reach out, we'll figure out what you want, what you need. And either, with Amanda and through CCLT, we'll be getting these going so we can get the help and support we need certainly for the GAP codes, but I know it's for the GIS as well.
Yes, and thanks to all of you for protecting all these properties. I'm always excited when I add new ones to the database. I know it's a lot of hard work and effort on all your part. So I definitely want feedback when it's not right. I want your work recognized accurately. So please feel free to reach out if need be.
And we should just all point that I'm not. I got news on a grant earlier today, so my brain is kind of unfocused, and I'm not using the best words right now, and I apologize. But I want to say you're the fixer, Amanda. There's so let's really give Amanda the props for being the fixer and being part of a team that's fixing this for us, and for giving us the tools to help you fix it. So thank you so much.
It's an honor. Thank you.
Well, thanks everyone. Is there anything else? Okay, we'll be reaching out soon then with more information.
So sorry to jump in.
Sure.
This is Daniel Mendoza. I'm a GIS analyst with the California Tile Conservancy. Is there, by chance, can we perhaps have an office hour or more detailed discussion from a GIS perspective? I don't want to totally abscond, with the focus of this meeting, but I was following through the toolkit as you were giving the presentation, and I might have a couple more detailed questions that might involve sharing a screen and some more detailed attribute discussions. So
yeah, definitely. Certainly, if you want to start by just emailing me here, and we'll go from there. I'm happy to set up a one-on-one meeting, and that could be both toolkit feedback if you think there are things we should be changing, and or if I think you said you were a GIS analyst, if you just have data and you think it's already all in there, it may be as simple as, can I just send you my file and you'll fix your stuff to match. So happy to do both, and definitely if you're finding things that might make it easier for others to use, that feedback would be great. So yeah, email me there and we'll set up a time to meet.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks everybody. We'll be in touch soon then.